Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. In this video I'm going to be making frangipani cuttings. So recently I gave my frangipani a really hard prune, that's why I've got so much cutting material. I cut them all roughly into about 30 centimeter length, that's about the right kind of length if you want to do a frangipani cutting. Now I've left them for about a month. I shouldn't have left them for quite this long, but I've been quite busy. But you really want to leave them for at least a week or two, and that's so that the end callus is over. Just get a close up of that for you now. So you can see here the end is callus over, it's kind of like a barky material. That will just stop any infection getting into the wound. And all of these several cuttings here will callus over quite nicely. So the cuttings that tend to work the best tend to be the tip cuttings. So that's this one here, you can see it's just top of the shoot. But what I've also taken is some cuttings from further down the stem. So you can see here, the top was taken off, it was probably one of these sections here. And so there's no obvious growth point, but as I've had this sitting around for a month, it's already starting to sprout. You can just see a little sprout starting here, and basically wherever there's a leaf scar you'll get a new shoot growing, so you'll often get 2 or 3 new shoots growing on it. So even if there's not any obvious growth shoot, if it's a middle stem like this, you can still stick it in the ground and it's just still root and it'll sprout out some new growths. You can also see a slight lump on that one there, which is also showing that it's going to become a new shoot. So this one will probably have 2 shoots in the end. I have an example here of one which is much further ahead. So this one you can see the end was cut off and it's got a shoot coming out. It's already growing some new leaves, and that's just using the moisture stored up in the stems. The stems are really quite succulent, they store a lot of moisture in them. They have become a little bit dried out. You can see a bit of wrinkling on some of these stems. As I say, I've left it a little bit too long, a month is a bit too long to wait. But you certainly want to wait a couple of weeks for it to dry out and callus. So I'm going to be potting these up into a mixture which is basically 50% perlite, 50% just kind of peat-based multi-purpose compost. The reason for that is it needs to be really a free draining mix with plenty of airflow, so the perlite keeps it nice and open, stops any kind of rotting, make sure it doesn't get waterlogged or anything like that. And then the multi-purpose compost is just to make sure there's enough moisture retained for the new roots when they finally do come out, but also it has a little bit of nutrients, so when the new roots establish there'll be a bit of feed for the plant as well as it starts to grow. So looking at the cuttings, it's quite easy to tell which way's up. It's especially easy if you take a tip cutting and it's got a shoot coming out the top, so that's easy enough, pointy end and flat end. But if you've got a cutting in the middle, such as this one here, it's flat at the top and also flat at the bottom, all you need to do is have a look at the leaf scars. So I'll give you a close-up here. So you can see in the close-up, there's kind of like a heart shape, or maybe kind of like a horseshoe shape. You can see it kind of curves around. And so what you're looking for is the bottom part of the curve should be like that, and the top should be, the indent should be the top of the kind of the U shape or the heart shape. So you can tell there that the rounded bit is bottom, so that needs to go in the ground, that end, and the curved bit with the notch on the top is the upward pointing section. So I'm just going to go ahead now and pop these all into their pots. So I've got a real shortage of space at the moment, so I've got 20 cuttings and I'm only going to be putting them in 6 pots, so I'm going to put 3 in each pot. But generally if you've got enough space, 2-litre pot or a bit bigger would be a good size for it, and you can pretty much just put it right in the middle, one cutting, bury it quite deep, because if it's not deep enough it'll tend to wobble around. But if you are burying it deep, remember it has to be a free root draining mix. If you've got a mix that stays wet very easily, the stems quite easily start to rot off. So I'm going to pop them in, probably, I don't know, that's probably about 4 inches deep, something like that. I'm just going to ease them in gently so they're not damaging the base at all, making sure there's just enough compost in it for them to hold themselves up. If you're doing this with just one, I would just put it in the bottom and just fill up, but because I'm doing 3 here, I'm not going to be able to hold all 3 at the same time very easily, so I'm just going to gently ease them in. And I'm just putting them a little bit towards the edge of the pot, because the edge of the pot tends to have the best airflow, and generally you'll get better rooting with the edge of a pot. So now all I need to do is fill them in with my 50% perlite and multi-purpose compost. So that's those 3 cuttings potted up. I'm just going to go ahead now and pot up the remaining 17 cuttings. So that's all my frangipani cuttings now potted up. You can see I've got 3 in every single pot, apart from this pot here which only has 1, and the reason for that is it naturally had a branching structure into 3 sections anyway, so there's a bit, if I put this one in with any other cuttings it'll probably become a little bit crowded. So what I'm going to do now is give these a really good soak. The compost I used was quite dry, so I need to make sure that they're nice and damp, but I also need to make sure any water does flow out from the bottom, so there's no excess water sitting in it at all. I'm then going to put these in my heated propagator. My flat is probably only about 20 degrees in summer because I live up here in Scotland where it's quite cool. And these are tropical plants, so they need quite high temperatures. So I'm going to have the propagator probably around 30 degrees. That's more like the temperatures they're used to in the tropics. They'll probably be fine anywhere from 25 to 35 degrees will probably be fine for them. The problem with getting up above 30 degrees is it can dry out the cuttings a bit quickly if you're not careful. What I'll also be doing is I'll be putting them in a propagator, but I'm not going to put the lid on. The reason for that is I don't want it to get too humid and I don't want there to be too much of a lack of airflow. Otherwise what will happen is it could get quite mouldy and start rotting off. But at the same time I don't want them too dry. So the place I'm going to be putting them is quite humid anyway, so that's fine. If you do put them out somewhere and they're in a heated propagator, make sure the vents are open so that there's enough airflow for them. But at the same time, don't put them in a really hot sunny position because they'll dry out too quickly. So what I'll be doing is putting them under some grow lamps. They're not very intense grow lamps, they're quite weak, just to give them enough light so that when they do start to grow, they can start photosynthesizing. As you can see, there's some leaves already appearing, so they'll be photosynthesizing very soon. So you want to put them somewhere quite bright. You don't want direct sunlight though. Direct sunlight will start to dry them out too quickly. But as soon as they start putting on strong growth, and that should be a sign that they've rooted, then you can give them strong sunlight and then they should be fine. What I will be doing with these is I'll be waiting until they start growing, and then once they start putting on some strong growth and I know that they've fully rooted, I'll be taking them out of their pots and I'll be splitting them up. So there's going to be one per pot, because 3 cuttings per pot like this is fine for the short term whilst they're getting the roots established. But when they're going into their final pot, they'll be far too choked together and there won't be enough space for them all to grow. And lastly, I was just going to add a thing about the perlite. If you aren't able to get perlite, which is this white expanded rock, which is quite often used to help with drainage in the soil, what you can also use as an alternative is bark, or you could also use, as long as it's quite small bark, the really big lumps of bark are probably a bit too big. And also, of course, you can use grit as well. Good grit and small pea gravel is quite handy for letting some more drainage into the soil. So that's it for now. I'll give you guys an update hopefully in a month or two, and they should hopefully be all rooting quite successfully. So it's now almost exactly 1 month later, and as you can see that a lot of them are putting on some quite nice growth. So you can tell now which ones have really put the roots down properly and which ones haven't. So for example, there's one here that probably hasn't put its roots down properly. So you can see there the trunk is still kind of shriveled up. It hasn't started absorbing any moisture from the roots. Also the top growth is very weak, hasn't really put much top growth on at all, and it's generally looking a bit dull and not too healthy. But if you go and look at some of these ones which are a bit healthier, you can see in this one it has the stems looking a lot more swollen. It's not getting any of those wrinkles on it. It's also got quite strong growth on it. It's looking quite healthy in general. And this one in particular at the back here has really done well. It's put on the most growth out of any of them, so it must have put its roots down nice and deep. You can see there it's got several new leaves, so this one's actually probably ready to be taken out. When it gets to the stage where you've got 3 or 4 nice healthy leaves, strong growth, you can then separate it from the other cuttings, put it in its own pot, and it should grow on quite happily. And I'll just show you one finally here, which I know you can see the roots coming out the bottom of it. That's this one here. From the top you can kind of see it's only just starting to come into growth, so I don't think it's had its roots for too long, and there's still a bit of shriveling on the stem, but that should kind of disappear over time. But when I have a look at the bottom, you can definitely see just here on the pot that there are some roots. And that's just those little white bits there, that's the roots just starting to show. So there we are. As I say, I'd probably give these a few more weeks just to get the roots fully established, and then I'd transplant them onto individual pots and they grow happily away into small young frangipani trees.